Welcome to the One Giant Podcast, a sportscaster featured podcast covering all things New York Football Giants. Live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning on Sportscaster, bringing balance to the analytics and emotions of covering Big Blue. Here are your hosts, Adam Armbrecht and Andy Mekowicz.
Yes, late night on a Monday. Just wrapped up some coverage of the Brooklyn Nets beating the New York Knicks. Figured why not come in and cover one of the topics that we've discussed on our threads here in the YouTube videos, speaking specifically around what are the targets that the Nets want to go after in the mock drafts and how do we make sure that obviously we achieve what are the most important goals for the New York Football Giants in just less than 20 days away, 23 days away or so. End of the month, the 29th, will officially be the NFL draft. So in conjunction with Joseph Clark, who mentioned, obviously, first two rounds, offensive line and wide receiver need to get after it. We also had another comment on one of the other videos that mentioned Bateman being the guy that you'd really like to see get brought into the fold. So with that in mind, as we've done before, we'll go ahead and get the screen shared up here. We'll blow this up so you can get a good look at it. And we're going to start to dive in just quick. We're going to run through this one quick. It's 10:30 or so on Monday night. So I'm not doing the hour and 15 like last time, but I just want to see how these first handful of rounds really play out here. If we choose to look for that trade back scenario, should an offer come, and then achieving the goal of maybe targeting even potentially in the first round. So we're going to try to do both things here. Give Joseph the wide receiver offensive line combination in the first two rounds, and then specifically try to achieve that goal of Rashad Bateman. So let's go ahead and throw it up full screen. I will zoom in a little bit here and just try to give us a nice shot of what we're going to be working with. And obviously the first thing we'll do is just quickly check on the box for the New York Football Giants. We're going to come over here and just bring this down just a notch just so I can see what goes on over the course of the first couple of rounds in terms of selections. Care for positional value, we're going to move that up pretty high because this is, of course, the first and second round specifically when we're talking about these scenarios. We want to make sure that these teams are evaluating talent relative to what they absolutely need. And obviously, even it's like top of the draft, you need guys to be taking quarterbacks because that's what's most important and not maybe getting thrown off by what would be considered best player available in some scenarios that would shuffle this deck and certainly move some of these quarterbacks down the board. The randomness factor will bring that down. We'll give a little dose of it. Draft for need, obviously, we want to keep that pretty high as well. Though again, the overall positional value is the biggest one that we want to make sure we're getting here, and we'll even bump up needs as well. So we'll go ahead and run this. We'll cut it down to a 6-round mock draft because I'm not going to be worried about that 7th round. Don't see myself trading down, and we'll leave it up there for right now, trading down and getting into any scenario where the Giants are going to pick up a 7th round pick. So let's go ahead and get ourselves into the draft. We'll go ahead and center up our board here a little bit, and away we go. So already right out the gate, we don't want to say this is a little bit concerning. Zach Wilson going 1, Trevor Lawrence going 2, but we'll live with those results. Kyle Pitts going to the Atlanta Falcons. That's not certainly that far-fetched if they're going to stay there. Obviously, the question mark becomes at 5, would the Cincinnati Bengals try to bring in Chase to repair up with Joe Burrow, his college QB? Got himself beat up pretty bad, so going with Penny Sewell and protecting that blind side makes a lot of sense, and then that allows the Dolphins to take Chase at 6. Devontae Smith going 7 to the Lions, that maybe is a little bit surprising, right? The difference between him and a Jalen Waddle, it's really about fit and what a team is looking for. And then the Carolina Panthers, this one might be even more interesting as well, right? Because they just made the trade for Sam Darnold. Don't know if you're going to have this evaluated in side of this particular mock draft that's going to account for that. Trey Lance going 9 there. So, what are we losing here? You're probably losing teams like the New England Patriots, maybe a team like the Chicago Bears being willing to come up. But for all intents and purposes here, what we want to accomplish is just getting a trade back and then seeing if we can pull out both those things of accomplishing getting a wide receiver as well as an offensive tackle and an offensive lineman, really. And we come down here, right? Rank 18th overall for Rashad Bateman out of Minnesota. 26th is his average draft position. So New York Football Giants sitting there, Mekhi Parsons, Rashad Slater. So, this would be an opportunity to take our guy But I think there is a world, and we talked about it on the podcast earlier today, that you can get a quality player and then also speak to some moves you can make on the line. So let's go ahead and look at the teams that are willing to trade. So here's probably the biggest issue we're going to run into right now. In this particular instance, the Colts are the first team up that is ready and willing to trade. So, we can try to look for the Miami Dolphins at 18 or maybe the Raiders at 17 that want to come up for one of these players. But right now, interested trade teams are the Colts, the Titans, the Ravens, the Saints, the Atlanta Falcons, the 49ers, and then the Dallas Cowboys. Teams, by the way, in the last three there that we're listing, those are all teams that are in the second round. So they'd be coming up from the second to the first round. Probably get a great haul, but a weird haul, one that would probably bleed over into next year's draft. The interesting thing here for me, and we'll play this out, but what makes it, and I'll let me just get myself zoomed in a little bit for this trade here. Let's say that it's going to be the Colts, right? We have to make this hard decision. Is that too far to go down? Well, we'll get their 21st overall pick. We're going to go for their second round pick as well. I'm going to click their third round selection and say, yeah, and then we're going to take that, right? Let's offer that trade. And actually does get accepted. So he probably could have even gotten a little bit more out of that. But at the end of the day, we pick up a second and third round pick. And that's, the big thing that we want to accomplish here is that. Can we get ourselves to that place? I tell you what, right now. So let's work our way through. There goes Mekhi Parsons. Rashawn Slater goes to the Vikings. That makes a lot of sense. You get Darrisaw goes to the Dolphins, offensive tackle. There goes to Washington. How about them? We've seen this in a couple of mocks with Marshall Jr. going to them. They just get gluttonous with their wide receivers. And then Vera Tucker, one of those offensive linemen that we've talked about. But what do we accomplish? We said this is the goal we were going for. I don't think you could bank on Rashad Bateman falling out of the first round. So we get our guy in the first round. That was the goal here as we try to check some boxes for multiple fans that were talking about the things that they wanted to see. Working our way into that second round, you see a guy like Zaven Collins go to the Philadelphia Eagles. That is a quality player. So we're seeing the division opponents get a little bit stronger here. But now we come up here at the top of the second, and this is why, again, remember, we now have multiple picks here. We're going to have the 42nd. We're also going to have the 54th. So we can afford to do a couple of different things here. And you can talk about, I think it was Joseph, Joseph Clark mentioned this here in one of our threads of looking at a guy like the center and seeing if it'd be possible. So if we go ahead and just pull these up here real quick, let's check the box for inside offensive lineman. You got Wyatt Davis is still going to be out there. Now his rank is 61st, average is 58th. So maybe you feel like it's a little bit too quick. There's the boy Creed Humphreys talking about him. And again, in the comments mentioned, I think that he's more the guy you want to plug in at the center position purely. So that would mean kicking a guy like Nick Gates back out to right guard. Doesn't mean you can't do it. But when you look at his average draft position, I don't know, if at the top of the second here, as opposed to maybe seeing if he fell into the third, depending on how you were playing out the draft, maybe that would be an option for you. But here, and we talked about this on the podcast, and I think it's something that is worth keeping in the back of our minds. As you scroll down the list, there's a couple of different players, but right here, this is the guy, Liam Eichenberg, the tackle out of Notre Dame. I think that, if you go in and you believe that one of two things, and this is maybe where philosophically it does become interesting, because you'd be talking about at this stage saying, well, either we're going to bring him in and we think that he can play right tackle. So, and he's going to be, all indications are he's going to be a very solid anchoring tackle at the NFL level. The question becomes, do you think you can kick him over to the right side, or does he need to play solely left tackle? At which point, would you kick Andrew Thomas over to the right side? Now, the optics of that and saying you drafted Andrew Thomas 4th overall last year, he needs to be your starting left tackle. Well, that can be true. It also can be true that all you want is the best combination. And for whatever reason, because he was the 4th overall pick in the draft, you think that he has the ability to swing over there. All I want is the best combination. So what I like about this is now, you say you want your weapon, I've gotten you your weapon. And Bateman, by the way, did himself a nice job at his pro day, ran, I think, closer to the 4.5 in his unofficial 40 time. All these times are going to be unofficial at the pro days without the combine this year. So you've given yourself a really talented wide receiver weapon. It's going to bolster that group. It's going to prepare for the potential departure of Sterling Shepard at some point. And really, this is the way the NFL is going. More weapons. Spread things out, right? Create more options for your quarterback. Create more difficult looks for the defense in the secondary and cornerbacks to be able to match up against. And that's what you've done in the first round. So I'm going to go ahead and say Eichenberg is the guy that I want to be taking there. as we work our way through this round, you can just think about after our selection there, you get the edge rusher, right? There's Elijah Moore going off the board. QB, Davis Mills, the New England Patriots, they get their guy a little bit later. And then, a guy like Wyatt Davis, again, had that injury in the final game of his career at college. So maybe that's some things that has to be cleared in terms of medically for teams to feel comfortable drafting him high in the second round as he's been earmarked for. But now we get back up at the 54th pick. And this is why it is nice to be here and why it's nice to have that trade down scenario. We got a quality wide receiver, we got a quality offensive tackle, and now here still in the second round, we get to kind of have our selection of who we might like. There's still a guy like Walker Little on the board on the offensive line. We don't need to look at wide receiver anymore. We don't need to look at offensive linemen. Jabril Cox is a nice one. My only issue with him is I think that he's a little bit more developmental in terms of what he's going to need to accomplish in order to really have an impact at the NFL level. And that's not a bad thing, but in the second round, I just probably want something that feels like it can really pay dividends somewhat quickly, excuse me. I come back to Joseph Asai, again, now you see the ranking, so it's right in line with where we want to be. I went and watched a bit more tape on him. He's a little bit stiff. He does remind me a little bit of Lorenzo Carter, which you can take as a compliment or as a slight, depending on how you feel about Carter. I'm not down on him. The thing that I do like about him is that, that he can drop back into coverage. I think he plays a little bit stiff. It's a little bit harder for him to get around the edge maybe at times. So there's some concerns there, certainly. But as far as a second round pick goes, I think that he can come in. I think that he could push O'Shane Ximenez for a starting role, big contributor role here early on in training camp and going into the regular season. And that would be something that would have to be enticing for the New York Football Giants and wanting to add at a position of need. The other guy that you could talk about, and we'll see what they give you here on Peyton Turner out of Houston, ideal edge build and physical presence to be a good edge rusher. He was pretty much unblockable for the 4 games before getting hurt in 2020. Injuries, that's always the concern that you maybe have there. 90% though on that pass rushing grade. And if we go back and just real quick here, we can run through where is Joseph Asai here. This is what I liked about him is the balance, right? 80.5 passer rush grade, 81 against the run across almost 600 snaps. So we've shown him before. I'm going to show him again here and say that overall, he's a nice fit. He can do both things for you, rush the passer and also be a part of coverage. So a little bit of versatility there for him. And I think in the big picture, whether or not O'Shane Ximenez ends up being a key component, short term, he can be a contributor. Long term, Blake Martinez a couple years from now, different positions, inside, outside. But again, just building up a strong core. And hopefully Lorenzo Carter gives you a sample size this year that tells you we're going to have him back on a second contract as well. Let's pull the trigger on that, and then we're going to head into the third round, where obviously we'll be getting a little bit more. So we went ahead, and by the way, just to be clear, 127 is what I got there from this. It's going to be the 4th round pick for them. So their first, their second, and their 4th. So here in the third, and like I said, maybe that wasn't rich enough, could have gotten a 5th round pick potentially. We can always think about that. One of the things that I also want to look at though too, because now we are up here in basically the top of the 3rd round. We see some of these other names that have gone. Rashad Weaver, nice edge rusher there to 71st pick overall to the Denver Broncos. And there's Creed Humphreys going to the Eagles. So they've got a couple of names that, we may be fans of that we want to take a look at. But now here in the 3rd round, there's a couple of things that I want to try to accomplish here. One, we still want to think about the next biggest position of need. That to me is going to be potentially the cornerback position. Don't want to get overconfident that we brought in Adoree Jackson. It's a nice addition, but then you still wonder about all the question marks behind him and a lot of guys that are essentially on 1-year deals in their final year of the rookie contracts, etc., and have left a lot to be desired. Cornerback wise, I do keep coming back to as we go past a guy like Hilliard. He's a nice little inside linebacker potentially. Here's the guy that I've come to before. Now you look at the average draft position. That's probably the only issue that you would hesitate on this. Even though his rank is top 100, we're here at 76. So it's probably a little bit further away than we would want it to be. I'm going to do a quick check here and just see. Here's the other guy that I like. Now, if you want to tell me that you want to go the route of taking a wide receiver in the 1st round with a trade back scenario, here's the benefit of doing that. Now you've already gotten yourself your offensive lineman. You've already gotten yourself an edge rusher. That means that you're open here to trying a couple of different things. And I'll bang on this drum time and time again. I really like Kenneth Gainwell. And we can talk about a guy like Khalil Herbert. We can even talk about Michael Carter, who's a little bit more traditional when we talk about what he can do. 200 pounds, selling point, as we're seeing here highlighted by PFF, is what he can do as a receiver. But again, if I'm talking about the multifaceted abilities of a player, then it ends up being a guy like Kenneth Gainwell that makes a lot of sense. You see most drafted by, right? 15%, 9, and then 8% for the Atlanta Falcons. Jets would be a nice fit for them. But if it's me, I think that if you want to be gluttonous, you want to make the offense impressive, you want to have a great option behind Saquon Barkley that can push over Devontae Booker. Booker also a special teams guy, so he can lean into that role even more if you brought in a successful rookie. The pass catching as well, can line up in the slot if you need him to. So if it's me, that's probably the route that I want to go. But the one thing, as we'll get back up our full board here, and I'll also get this full screen just to give us as big of an image as we can. The only other thing is when you walk through it, listen, he had a nice pro day, Davis out of Kentucky at the linebacker position. You see safeties, you see another guard, Tay Gowan. I'm not a particular fan of his defensive lineman. This is something that we talked about with Andy, where he thought that's something you want to lean to this draft. Then you look at the replacement parts for losing Dalvin Tomlinson and you think, listen, is it the perfect version? No, but what it did do was take that off the needs board, at least in the first few rounds of the draft, I think. Other guys that I'd highlighted previously was a guy like Jalen Darden. Listen, I like him, a twitchy player out of the slot, but he's no Rashad Bateman, and I think that that's a good value to want to go and get him. And you see how far down you're coming here, right? So where did we see? We said that we saw Rashard Wildgoose there. But there's Kenneth Gainwell. The difference being is look at that average draft position. So this is right in the sweet spot in terms of getting the value on this player. And when we look at the board overall, just quickly here, because we are talking about, right, safeties, okay, not a position of need. Look at the average, the ranking, and the average draft spot, right? So some of these guys are ranked higher than their draft positions suggest. And if we scroll down here a little bit, remember, we're picking at 76 right now. So some of these guys are either not scheme fits, not positional needs for us. And then also some of the other talent that's in behind there are ones we don't want to miss on as the draft starts to unfold. So most of these guys are getting drafted a little bit later, but the talent ranks suggest that they're higher up on these boards. If you want a player like Kenneth Gainwell, you got to pull the trigger on him early. I like the idea of doing it here. The only thing I want to do quickly before we get to that is I'd like to run a quick trade scenario. So we have 196 and 201, something we discussed on the podcast episode earlier today. And it was just the idea of where can the Giants potentially get up to? Because would you rather have 4 true quality players, maybe a 5th one because we've traded down now? Or are you content to go all the way into those deep rounds and maybe get some more guys like last year, the Carter Coughlins, the Cam Browns of the world, right? And there, we highlighted some offensive linemen that I think would be good to take there as well. But ultimately, we have some veterans on the roster at every key position. Just getting 3 or 4, 5 even, just quality targets is really what we're after here, as opposed to quantity of targets, because we're not going to fill every single need. So I'd rather be targeting key players that we really like. So in that regard, what you can do is say, the 2 6th-round picks and even this 4th-round pick now, how high up do we want to try to get in this draft to maybe target a player? So if we're looking just quickly again here, what's someone that we maybe would want to take a shot on in addition to Kenneth Gainwell? Let's say that, I've run this before where I've said I do like a guy like Wildgoose. Okay, that's fine, but you see how low he's going. The safety position is a little bit tricky. Tight end. Some people have said we still should bring in a tight end, try to force maybe a trade opportunity for a player like Evan Ingram with another team, get him off the books, etc. The defensive lineman, by the way, in Tommy Toagaya, he's someone that I think, Ohio State, obviously you're playing along a lot of other talented players there. Maybe I would take a flyer on him. But again, when you're talking about the rank and the average draft, so he's getting taken a little bit sooner than maybe his rankings suggest. And then Pete Werner is another linebacker there out of Ohio State as well. But there you go. See, as you start to work yourself down this board, you can find the kind of guys that you want to look at. Chaz Surratt is one of those guys for me. Do this quick look here. He's a weapon as a blitzer, plays with an uncoachable recklessness into contact. God, that's how you want those kind of descriptions to go. He is a project, though, right? And that's what you expect. So now just the question becomes here, he's a 113 rank, average ADP of 103, though. So would he be there for us if we sit back and we get back up to the top of our board and say we have a 116, or do we need to get a little bit higher up? So this is where I think it comes in handy. So let's just go ahead and try to maximize the value that we're going to get out of our roster. Really, we want to look at anybody that's in the market to trade down or trade up, excuse me, and that we could move up the board for. San Francisco, 102. That might be the ideal scenario where we say, I want that 102 pick there for you, and I'm willing to give you. First, let's go ahead and give it a whirl here, and maybe we hang on to one of our late round picks. I'll give you that 201 from Arizona, and I'll give you 201 in 196. And let's see if we can get that to go. I didn't think it would, and it didn't. So now we go ahead and we'll say, all right, let's just bump it down here and try to give you that 4th round pick to move up the board 25 spots, get the job done. So we throw them the 127 and 196. We get ourselves up to 102, moving 25 spots up the board. And now when we get back into this picture here, let's play it out. 76, 102, 116, and 201 remaining for us to draft. I want to get that player that I think is a versatile weapon for us. I'm going to go ahead and get down for Kenneth Gainwell out of Memphis, pull the trigger on him, get this draft board going again, start to look through. There goes Sean Wade, cornerback out of Ohio State. There's Davion Nixon. I think he's a nice guy to keep your eye on if the Giants, we're looking to get in there. Dylan Moses out of Alabama goes to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And there it is right there. Look, 88th overall is where Chaz Surratt went. So we tried to trade ourselves kind of into that sweet spot and maybe cost ourselves. Now we take a step back and think about what are some of the other players that we maybe want to get into. Is it Justin Hilliard, someone who really is predicted to line up in that 4-3 and probably at the very best would start on the inside and be more akin to a Blake Martinez as opposed to, a versatile in coverage linebacker on the inside. So now, listen, we're kind of caught in pivot territory here. So if you're going to trade up, you got to trade up far enough to get the guy that you're after. I'll go ahead and come back up to the top of the board and say, at this point, the value maybe of a Davis with where his player ranking is worth taking a look at. Let's pull the trigger on him. And we're just doing this to keep it flowing here. If you go back and think about the previous mock draft that I did, remember, the trade down was there for us. We went ahead and executed it. But what we did, we went with Vera Tucker there to start. Then in the second round, it was about what's the weapon, edge rusher or wide receiver. Keep yourself versatile with your options open. This is why I think if you're trading down, you need to be just wary of what you lose by taking the weapon early. And then you see this trickle down effect where you kind of in these in-between territories. And now here with 116 left on the board and 201, we're in the 4th round here, pick 11. Where do we think we want to go now? Do we want to add more potential offensive line depth? Is there another weapon that we want to look at? Now we've added a wide receiver and a running back, so we feel pretty confident there. I'd be curious if, and here you go, this is where I think a player like Rashard Wildgoose is a good selection. 4th round, so you're getting value on him. We've covered him before, obviously, but the athleticism, the natural skill set is good. Going to want to develop him a little bit, but I do like the idea of getting him into our secondary room and then trying to build from there and knowing that through the course of training camp, a lot of these guys are going to wean themselves out. So if Wildgoose could come in and establish himself amongst that group and make a way onto the roster for himself, that'd be a pretty impressive little pluck here, especially in the 4th round. Take a quick scan through just to see if there's anybody else that we maybe want to get a look at. I'm comfortable as it stands right now. Maybe one other player, because I'll make the note here, and we're actually not going to get a good look there. So I'm going to real quick come over here and just go full screen this way. And I'm just going to quickly pull up a profile on that last tackle that we saw sitting there, Robert Hainsey, because I wanted to double check what his versatility is going to be as far as if he could kick inside or not. In the event that he could, maybe there's an opportunity to take a flyer on a guy like this here in the 4th round over a cornerback, because again, we want to make sure that we're giving ourselves some depth, knowing that potentially at some point throughout training camp, maybe we're going to move on from Will Hernandez. Obviously, we're looking across this offensive line and saying Nick Gates is going to be coming up for a contract at some point as well. And listen, it's even a safeguard for a Shane Lemieux, for a Pert. Do we like what we got from Pert in sample size? Of course we did. It doesn't mean it's an automatic that he's going to be a lockdown, right tackle. When we took Etchenberg, that was signaling that Pert, you're going to kick inside to guard and try to compete at that right guard spot. Played 13 plus games at the college level. So that's the mindset there in that regard. But I wanted to just see if Hainsey has the ability to kick inside an interior line, because now you're talking about additional competition for a guy like Shane Lemieux, maybe a backup at both guard positions, even potentially at the center position as well. He's listed here at what would end up being probably a backup swing tackle. So I don't know if you want to lean too hard into that at this stage of the draft. So let's go ahead and pull that trigger on Wild Goose. And then we're going to look all the way here at the back end of this 201 and see if it's possible for us to get the job done with an extra player that has some value that potentially could flesh out what we've been able to do to this point of the draft. But this is why I know a lot of fans have said, add another weapon, prepare for the departure of Sterling Shepard, more power, more dynamic for Daniel Jones. I get it. But as it stands right now, you have Sterling Shepard, you have Kenny Golladay, you have Darius Slayton, you still have Evan Ingram. I've had my issues with him, but you do still have him. You've added Rudolph, dealing with that foot injury, supposed to be ready for the start of the regular season. You still have a Caden Smith on this roster. And even in these scenarios that we've talked about, in the second round, there's still going to be wide receivers to take. Second or third round, you can still find yourself getting an Amon-Ra St. Brown potentially that I think has tremendous upside. So I just, the risk reward of going too deep into the draft and trying to address all your areas of need can be a risky one. Now here at 201, where maybe it doesn't matter particularly that much, you can certainly say that a defensive lineman might be worth taking a shot on here. I don't know if this is Jonathan Cooper that Andy had mentioned earlier, but I had done this the last time as well. So if you're Joseph Clark and you've run through this mock draft with me, you've seen me look at a guy like Cedarius Hutcherson, and liked what he could develop as backup swing tackle to start and maybe a starting player for you at some point down the road. So let's just pull the trigger on that and then look at this draft overall relative to how we wanted to come in and attack this. As I apologize, I got myself a little side saddled on the rest of the draft board. So as this runs through and finishes itself out, the question that you have to ask is, was the trade back worth it here? So let's make sure, let me just get myself centered up here, right? So look what happens. And if you remember, go back to the last draft that I had done. I came out, I think, with a B plus overall grade for the draft, right? Here in this one, for everything that we did, Rashad Bateman, listen, value and selection, obviously. That's what happened there, right? The trade down with the Colts was quality. Got a lot of good picks back. Got their first rounder at 21, got their second rounder, and also picked up their fourth rounder along with it. The trade itself was quality, but what we got back in return was questionable. And that even leans into Etchenberg as well. And this is why I think it's a little bit tricky about what the Giants choose to do if they choose to trade back and how they execute on it. Because Bateman, you're getting a C- grade out, and that's a combination of the talent and where you're taking him and the depth of the position overall in the draft. Etchenberg, I can live with the C grade. Again, you're trying to fill a need there. We like what we did through a lot of these middle rounds here, right? Got the edge rusher, quality pick in the, still in the second round there. Third round, a weapon in Kenneth Gainwell. Fourth round, a guy that dropped and maybe could on draft day, and we feel like we got a little bit of a steal. Draft second trade up here now when we got up to 102 and gave up 2 picks. Relatively good, maybe over sold a little bit there on that one. Could have given up a future pick in next year's draft potentially. But we got ourselves Wild Goose in doing that. And remember, we missed out on Surratt. That's who we were trying to get up there for. So if we could have gone back and done this, he went at 88. I may just as well have taken him in the 76 slot here and said, that's who I want to make sure I get. If Gainwell falls, fantastic. And then instead of Davis, we take a look at the running back room or maybe cornerbacks. Good quality pickup in Wild Goose. And then again, a nice little late round steal in Cedarius Hutcherson. Overall, B- on the mock draft. We're coming up on just on 30 minutes here. So what I'm going to run through really quickly now and just reset this board and just try to do it in a little bit different fashion here. So we're right back in on it. We know the speed we want to run at. Let me just make sure the randomness is relatively, and try to keep all that randomness away, right? And as we said, this one was a little bit off just when we think about who went where as far as the quarterbacks went early in that last mock, but ultimately the results are basically where you want them to be. So how did things shake out? This is right? Top of the draft was different last time. Zach Wilson went first. Not going to happen. It's okay. The quarterbacks came with the board. Fields goes. Last time it was Kyle Pitts. This time it is Jamar Chase. Sewell still goes to the Bengals. Smith, Waddle. There goes Trey Lance. So they still get a quarterback in spite of having a Sam Darnold. You can say, is that a necessity for them right now? Maybe, maybe not. And then Mac Jones ends up falling to the Denver Broncos, and then you get Kyle Pitts going to the Cowboys, just ahead of us. So close. All right, so now again, we did this before. We traded down because some teams are hungry to come up here. On the board right now as it stands, Mekhi Parsons, Rashad Slater, Patrick Surtain. These are all quality players. If we're going to risk trading down here, though, we got to try to see if we can do this a smarter way. So very quickly here, we're not going to do anything, we're not going to just one pick stop or anything like that. Even if we say, let's go with the 15th pick from the New England Patriots. We're going to give them the 11. And I don't know if we'd even get back that 46 from them. That would be a pretty big leap there. I'll just try to click in a couple of offers and see if we get them to bite. So they went ahead, they took it. That was pretty impressive. So maybe, so there you go. Only a four pick move for them to come up here. And ultimately we grab their first round pick, we grab their second round, and then we grab what ends up being like a late fourth round selection there. Who'd they go with? They went with Patrick Surtain. So they get their lockdown corner that they want to add to that mix. There goes Mekhi Parsons to the Eagles. Gosh, would that sting? There goes Slater. Horns. When we come back up here now, this is where it's different for me. Instead of going that route of taking Bateman, I look at it and I think one of two things. Do I want to go with a pure edge rusher like Kwity Paye and check that box? Or do I want to go for a guy like Vera Tucker and make sure that I'm checking the box for my offensive line? Because that's the questions that we're getting ourselves into right now. So instead of going with, and even by the way, if it was me, this guy right here, Ojulari is to me just a stud of a player. I know how good Kwity Paye is as well. Be highly unlikely that the Giants would go past Kwity Paye to Ojulari, though he is a rising player. So for sake of argument, though, let's check a different box. Let's not worry about wide receiver right now. Let it play out. We'll go ahead and just pump this speed up real quick here so we get ourselves back on the board. Okay, who do we see go? Players like there goes Leatherwood, Elijah Wood. Where did a couple of our guys go? Just real quick here. There's Vera Tucker going at 25. Kwity Paye went a couple picks behind us as well. There's Bateman going to the Bears. That makes all the sense in the world. Now we're back on top. We've gotten our edge rusher, a dynamic, athletic weapon, a guy that can go off the edge, can drop into coverage. I mean, just fantastic. Put a little bit of weight on when he comes to the pro level, obviously, but love a guy like Ojulari. Now, once again, we can choose to take a player like we had highlighted before at the tackle position, if that's what we want to do, like an Etchenberg, or we can talk about some of these other players on the offensive line, let's say inside line. And this is where you get into the Wyatt Davises of the world, maybe even a Landon Dickerson who comes out. Here's the problem. ACL tear, obviously right there. And he earned, listen, that 91.3 overall grade is fantastic. It's a center position grade. That's the question mark. Would you be willing to shift Nick Gates out of it? Another guy that's had a pretty good pro day for himself and is a rising star right now. You see it coming up higher and higher day by day, and that's Menners. So either one of the, any of these players we'd be happy to take, even a guy like Wyatt Davis. Overall on the board, just quickly, you talk about Walker Little. Here's a guy that, again, he played one game since 2018. That's the reason why I tend to stay away from him, especially from a Giant standpoint. We're looking for someone that we can plug and play here. A guy like Randuns, if you go in there, again, ACL tear. So these are the things that are tricky for the New York Football Giants and for any team really in these draft classes. How do you assess guys that are coming off of injuries? Likewise, for a guy, as we work our way down this chart here a little bit, not Etchenberg as much as Wyatt Davis, right? That's the concern that we have around him as well. If we want to go just real quick here, I want to throw up the wide receiver board. Josh Palmer's one that certainly Andy Makowitz has been pretty big on. Tylan Wallace, another name that's pretty good. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, again, I look at an Amon-Ra St. Brown and feel good about what he can do, even though he doesn't have great separation capabilities. But I do like his talent. Let's just go ahead and get this cleared off here. There we go. All right. So now that we took the edge rusher up first, let's go. Let's just continue to live in that same world that we talked about. Remember, we have multiple picks here. So we can actually do a couple of things. For example, as I just passed Jabril Cox, we can look at a guy that could start and obviously is more of a developmental player. Again, we're worried a little bit about what it's going to be for his development. How long will it take him to get there? But he's another athletic player that would be a nice little weapon for Patrick Graham inside of it. From that standpoint, I look at Jabril Cox, and that is pretty enticing. But I'm going to go with Etchenberg again real quick as we try to work our way through this, but it's not so easy, right? And then we take another look here, and now we can think about any number of these weapons. Remember, we're picking at 76 again after this. So let's go ahead and just grab. I'm going to grab Jabril Cox. You can swap in any name that you want across these. I just want to get through this quickly and make just a point about what happens when you make that trade back, and then depending on what position you address first in that first round. So when you choose to go wide receiver, how does it impact what you then need to accomplish in rounds 2 and 3 versus going edge rusher, which I would argue is a bigger need having signed Golladay, and obviously offensive line would be the other one there. I go offensive lineman, then I go edge rusher, then I go weapon. Doesn't have to be wide receiver. It could be on the defensive side of the ball, even can be running back, any of those things. So now we're here at 76, though. We still haven't gotten another one. This is another opportunity here, right? Rashad Weaver, love him. Love the way that he plays. So I would be excited to take him if I had gone offensive lineman in the first round potentially. But now we've worked our way through it. And as I quickly come down, there's the cornerback wild goose that we've talked about. There's Kenneth Gainwell. Like, I'm going to keep coming back to this over and over and over again in terms of where we're picking here. And then there's Amon-Ra St. Brown. So will both of these guys be available for us? We're not entirely sure. And then remember, where did we see? We saw Chaz Surratt right there that got taken previously. So we know that he's going to go a little bit sooner probably, but I can make the case that you can go one of two ways. You can take Amon-Ra St. Brown right here at this spot, and you can feel like that's a bit of a reach, but again, you're picking for the talent that you think fits your scheme, or you can go for a Kenneth Gainwell. So these are going to strike you as similar. I'm now going to double down on another similar player from the previous draft, but again, I'm going to try to now, with a little bit of knowledge from our previous one, say, let's execute a quick trade here. Let's say that we want to get ourselves up to the Chicago Bears next selection. I want to get to the 83rd pick. I'm going to be willing to give them 116 and 196. Let's see if we can get that to go. There you go. So for 116 and 196, I get myself back up to 83. I can go back in here. Now I'm going to go ahead and say, I like the pick that I had in my mind. I like bringing in a weapon. I understand what people are looking for. I think that you can wait and hold off on getting another wide receiver weapon, certainly until a little bit later in the draft. And there could be a guy that's worthy of doing that here. As remember, we're going to come back up at 139. And now at 83, I can come down and get the guy that I missed out on in the previous mock. And that's going to be Chaz Surratt. I like him. We talk about it. He's a weapon as a blitzer, plays with an uncoachable recklessness. We said that before, right? He's still a product against the run game. But by the way, here's the great thing about him being one of those. You see that his draft stock has been dropping a little bit, right? So is there an opportunity that we could be getting him a little bit later? Maybe. But I feel like, again, if there's a player that you like, make sure that you accomplish getting him at the spot that you think the value aligns. So, and again, you can take a look at a guy like Monty Rice out of Georgia. He has some value as well. Pete Werner, again, limited, more of an inside guy. I just happen to be a fan of Chaz Surratt, so I'm going to pull the trigger on drafting him, and then the draft is going to start to roll right through here. And if we just quickly pause it for 1 second, I want to look at the big board one last time, and this goes back to what we've been talking about as far as where we may think we have another need. So is there another trade that'd be worth it for us to come up as we get back into this here? Or do we just stand pat, We'll go ahead and run it through. We made one trade down. Let's not worry about anything else. Wait for ourselves to come up at 139 in that opportunity that we traded down with the New England Patriots. And now again, we're right back in that same spot. Cornerbacks galore. Certainly, this actually, lets us know that a player like Wild Goose, who took a 116 last time, he could be available a little bit later for us. If we want to talk about wide receivers, say that you appreciate that I got a player like Kenneth Gainwell. There's Jalen Darden, who I highlighted in a previous mock draft. If you come down a little bit further here and you can see the difference, remember, we have 139 and then all the way down to 201. So if there's someone you like, go get him. Now, here's a guy that I like, and that is Trevin Grimes, big player. You see where he's ranked here, so maybe you feel like there's no need to go after him right now. Another player that I'm a fan of is Tyler Vaughns. I think that he has a great skill set that would play very well, and as you can see on PFF, climbing the charts at the end of this month here based off of the pro day action, and you can see mostly coming in before the 200s, but probably going to continue to rise as we work our way towards the draft. Anyone else here higher up that I might like? And Amari Rodgers certainly gives you some opportunities. He's been fairly stagnant through his pro day. Even a smaller school out of UAB like Austin Watkins, I'm also a fan of his as well. So there are some options there. But to be honest, you want to talk about a steal and whether or not this player would be here, this would feel much more comfortable for a draft point for this player. Again, I watched some tape on Jalen Darden. He is twitchy. He is good in tight spaces. The question is the level of competition that he was playing against going to give you the right sample size to know what he can accomplish for you? But if you want to go that route, that player is there and available for you to add another weapon into the arsenal. Other than that, we start to think about our guy like Wild Goose. Some people have said they want to dip their toe into the tight end waters to be able to potentially trade off. I just think you have to live with the reality of what the Giants are looking to do here. They believe in a player like Evan Ingram. He's going to get every opportunity to be successful here. Even a Trill Williams, by the way, who saw a big drop off after his pro day, is maybe a little bit of a project that you think about going after. So, short of loving a Shakur Brown, who, again, a lot of these players, especially at the secondary level, are going to be hit or miss developmental prospects, in my opinion, as you work your way through the draft. Here is one last name to think about. Big fan, and Notre Dame is obviously very good at pulling out some of these players. That's Aaron Banks. And I'll quickly just give you a scouting report on him, as we had talked about him, I think not in the previous mock draft, but there's been a lot of chatter around what his potential fit could be. So just to give you that quick rundown on what we like about him, he's a scheme-specific starting offensive guard. You want to get him in man-gap power schemes, obviously, but he is a multi-year starter with the Irish. We know that Notre Dame has turned out a lot of quality offensive linemen over the years, going back to Quentin Nelson. We can all think of that famously in the year when we took Saquon Barkley. But he does have plenty of weight distribution below the waist, so he is a nice anchored body there. He has a great power at the point of attack, and he's a blocker that can look to drive opponents off the line of scrimmage. So he does need to figure out, as far as working on the inside of the line there. Getting out in space is going to be a little bit tricky for him. The lateral movement is going to be a little bit harder. So again, when you think back to a guy like Will Hernandez and what worked or did not work with him as far as being a pulling guard, maybe that's a little bit trickier. Listen, I know you can say that everyone wants the wide receiver. So rather than take the prospect, I'll go ahead and pull the trigger on a wide receiver here on the board. And if you think that Jalen Darden can be a nice project, that's fantastic. If not, listen, there's guys that I like more or less than others. And Dax Milne has been someone who's been on the rise as well. So pull the trigger on any one of these players. It really doesn't matter to me. Let's grab Dax and go run ourselves through the rest of this draft and just look at what the grades come out to here when it's all said and done, including obviously the trade down grade as well. So now listen, you can say Rashad Bateman is clearly a better talent than Dax. Obviously he's going to be. And as we come up here at the back end of this draft, we just look our way through. Again, we're looking for talent. We're looking for a quality prospect. And I'm continuing now at this point of the draft to look at some of those guard prospects that we've talked about, inside linemen, swing tackles even, that can develop within our system and be quality backups. And by the way, some of the wheeling and dealing may find ourselves a little bit on the outside looking in. Actually, a guy like Chauncey Golston, I thought would be someone that could be worth taking a flyer on. May have to do a little bit more of a deep dive on him. Not at all against a guy like Jonathan Cooper either. But for argument's sake, we see a guy like Menet is there. We also see Borum, but I was confirming there. His pro day, more recent sample sizes, not trending in the right direction. We've lost out on a couple of those later round targets that I liked on the offensive line as well at this stage. So maybe some issues in that regard for this version of the mock draft. But let's have some thoughts about maybe a defensive lineman. And now we'd be double dipping into BYU or even a linebacker as well in Ernest Jones, though we've already taken an edge and a linebacker as well. So we probably don't need to get into those waters again. I'm just trying to take a little look here and identify if there's a quality backup offensive lineman that we may want to take a look at. Or, John Bates out of Boise State is certainly a developmental prospect that could be a nice one to take a look at as well. I can't bring myself to take a tight end. This is a little bit tricky now because we got a little bit off board. Let's get that inside lineman pulled up here. Oh, you know what? And Kramer, even though you see the draft position, you see 270. I actually don't mind him as a developmental player. Again, double dipping back into the college ranks of Notre Dame. I wouldn't hate that. Short of that, offensive tackle wise, Van Lanen isn't a bad one either. And Robert Jones actually is one that I've come into before. So I'll pull the trigger on Robert Jones again, just because I've done the deep dive on some of his tape and liked what I saw on him. Let's get this thing run through, get us out the door, and just give this quick comparison about the difference of what we can do at the top of the draft in those first couple of rounds. So here we go. So what difference has it made? We get a great grade on the trade down again, quality assets in return. Ojulari, B grade there, so an improvement over taking Rashad Bateman in the first round. Again, positional value and depth of the position in the draft overall. Etchenberg, we know, is going to come out around the same way, so C+ grade there. Jabril Cox, we said maybe a little bit of a reach there. Talk about developmental prospect. We ended up going with Chaz Surratt. Let's be realistic here. The mistake made was right there, right? We don't need to come up to get Chaz Surratt. We took Jabril Cox, so we go Kenneth Gainwell here, and this is where you can plug in an Amon-Ra St. Brown. So even though this trade down here, not graded as well, but look what we ended up picking up here, 139 and 201. We get a quality player at a BYU at the wide receiver position. We get a quality player at tackle who can be a backup at both sides, both positions, and develop over the next couple of seasons. We know that Nate Solder is not long for this roster. Both come out with B+ grades and an overall draft grade of a B+. So, these are quality positions. Now, you can hesitate and say the top of the draft grades are not as solid as those mid and late round grades, and that's fair. But at the end of the day, and you can talk right here, the Chaz Surratt at 83 versus going to BYU for the wide receiver at 139. You can flip-flop those. You can probably get a quality wide receiver. So if that's what you're looking for in this draft, go ahead and assume that you get him there. That means that you'll have found some additional quality in this draft. And again, as we see, Joseph Clark had checked in here and said, likes the argument for Gainwell. I'm going to keep pushing that train. I think that there's a quality player. And by the way, when you do that, Kenneth Gainwell at 76, that's what makes, even though, as we know, when you look it over ultimately and you say, Ojulari, okay, we got the edge rusher. Then you get the tackle. That's good. You're going to kick in Pert to the inside. All right, fine. Taking Jabril Cox is a little bit of a developmental player and a little bit higher than maybe you'd like to. Gainwell is great. I love him. I think circle it up. I'd love to take him. And he's a multifaceted running back and wide receiver. And then Chaz Surratt, though, so you feel like, boy, is that too much? But think about it realistically. We brought back Devontae Downs. He doesn't need to have a roster spot. Inside linebacker, edge rusher, doesn't matter where you want to line him up. And then you can even think about two guys coming off of injury in Lorenzo Carter and an Ocean Exhibit. As I said, if you're looking at roster spots, Ocean Exhibit might be a guy that's going to be on the outside looking in when it comes to cut days and making space. I just think that overall, we've given ourselves a quality collection of talent in this second version versus taking a quality guy that I'm a big fan of in Rashad Bateman. But where did you sell yourself short as you worked your way through the rest of the draft? Think it over. Talk amongst yourselves. I'll be back in on Wednesday with Andy Makowitz breaking down all things New York Football Giants, and I'll deep dive in through another handful of these players. Remember, we said we flashed a guy out of the smaller school in Texas there at wide receiver. Went and studied some more tape, kind of pushed me off of him, saying a little too rich. He's more of a 4th or 5th rounder if he falls to that spot for you. But consistently now what we're starting to outline is a guy like Kenneth Gainwell. I look at that 3rd round, and if he's there, that could be a real quality selection for the Giants. And then even into those later rounds, let's come back in tomorrow, not worry about mock drafts, but let's take a look at the wide receiver out of BYU and out of the tackle out of there in Middle Tennessee and talk about late round value for the New York Football Giants. You can follow the podcast, obviously, wherever you get those needs fulfilled. Rate and review it. Leave a glowing comment if you're so inclined. And obviously, check back in here right on the YouTube channel as we continue to run Mondays and Fridays live every single morning. Had some technical difficulties this morning, but every single Monday and Friday, and then throughout the week, doing some of these mock drafts and covering these prospects as we work our way towards the draft at the end of the month. We want to keep refining. So you're going to hear me say, oh, I like this player, and then read more scouting reports, study more tape, and decide not going to be right where we're going to be selecting. Kenneth Gainwell at this point continues to be a guy that is entrenching himself into my thinking around how you can build out a really complementary roster that has all the weapons that you want for Daniel Jones and all of the safeguards and depth behind the key positions, like the wide receiver, like the running back, Saquon Barkley coming off injury. As always, I've been Adam Armbrecht, and as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and demand that you know, friends, as always, let's go Big Blue.